Hi everybody and welcome back. Okay, today we're going to be talking about Barack Obama, right, who was president between 2008 and 2016. Now you guys are old enough that I'm sure you remember Barack Obama. He was only president, left the office 4 years ago. So most of you who were born, around 2001 or so, were kids when he was elected. He was probably president during most of your childhood through high school. President Obama is a significant president for several reasons. First and most obvious is he is the first black president of the United States. When he was elected, there was a lot of hope, maybe naive hope, that with the election of a black president, that would sort of solve the racial tensions between blacks and whites and everybody would come together. Maybe those hopes were a little bit unrealistic. We know from what we've learned in this class with Lyndon Johnson and even going back to Abraham Lincoln, it's very difficult to solve the race issue in the United States. It is a deep tension that has very deep roots in the American experience, in American history. Okay, let's listen to a clip from a speech Obama gave in 2004. This is 4 years before he's elected president. This is the first time he came to the attention of the American public. He's speaking at the Democratic National Convention in support of another candidate, John Kerry.
Now, even as we speak, there are those who are preparing to divide us. The spin masters, the negative ad peddlers, who embrace the politics of anything goes. Well, I say to them tonight, there is not a liberal America and a conservative America. There is the United States of America. There is not a black America and a white America and Latino America and Asian America. There's the United States of America. The pundits like to slice and dice our country into red states and blue states. Red states for Republicans, blue states for Democrats. But I've got news for them, too. We worship an awesome God in the blue states, and we don't like federal agents poking around in our libraries in the red states. We coach Little League in the blue states, and yes, we've got some gay friends in the red states. There are patriots who opposed the war in Iraq, and there are patriots who supported the war in Iraq. We are one people, all of us pledging allegiance to the Stars and Stripes. All of us defending the United States of America.
Okay, so you heard him there reprising some themes from Bill Clinton's speech, if you remember from the previous lectures, talking about bringing America together, healing the divisions. And this must have been music to his audience's ears, especially coming from a black politician, him seeming to give them hope. There is no such thing as black America and white America, only the United States of America, right? Maybe in retrospect, we could say this sort of fueled the hopes that was put onto Obama to heal the racial division, which would be a very tough job. And as we'll see a little bit later on, we cannot say that the racial division in the United States has been healed. But it wasn't just the hopes for racial unity. Somehow Barack Obama symbolized more than that, especially to young people and to liberals. He did represent that sort of liberal hope, that liberal tradition within American politics, which we saw was somewhat on the defensive ever since the 60s, but never went away. And certainly he was younger than the other boomer politicians. He was born in 1961. You could call him a boomer, a late boomer, not really the same generation. And he had a certain style, a certain charisma that appealed especially to young people. And you can see in the 2008 election a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of idealism, a lot of hope being put in this new politician. Let's take a look at a music video that was made by will.i.am, and as you'll see, he had help from a whole bunch of other stars, and it sort of symbolizes the hopes of young people and also the sort of the star power, the magnetism of that Obama campaign.
It was a creed written into the founding documents that declared the destiny of a nation. Yes, we can. It was whispered by slaves and abolitionists as they blaze the trail toward freedom. Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
It was sung
by immigrants who struck out from distant shores, pioneers who pushed westward against unforgiving wilderness. Yes, we can.
Yes, we can.
It was the call of workers organized, women who reached for the ballots, a president who chose the moon as our new frontier,
And a king who took us to the mountaintop and pointed the way to the promised land.
Yes, we can to justice and equality.
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can.
You can hear there the power of Obama's rhetoric, including an echo of Martin Luther King's mountaintop speech. And also you can feel the way it resonated amongst young people who were looking for idealism. Of course, Barack Obama wasn't elected president just based on style points amongst young people. There were some major political reasons for his election as president. The first amongst these was that Barack Obama was opposed to the war in Iraq, which was still ongoing at the time of the 2008 election. It had kind of been bogged down for quite some time. The war in Iraq had become extremely unpopular as the American people slowly realized that they had been sort of sold a bill of goods, that the war in Iraq wasn't really justified. It had nothing to do with 9/11. Saddam Hussein did not, in fact, have weapons of mass destruction. They started to realize that the war in Iraq would just continue until American troops were withdrawn, and until that time, American soldiers would keep dying, and the costs of the war, which were enormous, one credible estimate is $2.4 trillion, would just continue to mount. Another major reason for the election of Barack Obama was the 2008 financial crisis, which happened right during the home stretch of the 2008 election. Unlike his opponent, John McCain, Barack Obama gave the impression of keeping his cool, of being competent, of being in control. He seemed smart and in charge, and he reassured a nervous nation. And indeed, Barack Obama was elected by a healthy majority. You see him here at his inauguration with his wife, Michelle Obama. Indeed, when he came into office, he did get the situation under control. He did manage the crisis. However, the way he did so was by bailing out or rescuing the big banks and financial institutions which caused the crisis in the first place. The financial sector had long been making record profits for about the previous decade. At the same time, manufacturing jobs were being shipped overseas, and blue-collar, working-class communities were falling into despair, with levels of unemployment and opioid abuse, opioid addiction and overdoses skyrocketing. You see here some photos from the Rust Belt where factories that had long been closed were rusting, and you can imagine the communities falling into poverty and dysfunction around them. But finance didn't pay for the destruction that it had caused, and it was the American taxpayers who were left holding the bill. Some critics said that he was running a Wall Street government. Here you see Obama early in his term in office with Tim Geithner there on his left. That's the Secretary of the Treasurer. And on his right is Larry Summers. You might remember the name Larry Summers. He was one of the advisors to Bill Clinton, one of the architects of financial deregulation and the overall policy of neoliberalism. And indeed, yes, both Tim Geithner and Larry Summers were associated with Robert Rubin, that other major financial advisor of Bill Clinton, right? This neoliberal policy was basically continuous with, similar to the policies that were held by the Bush administration, free trade and deregulation, right? You can call it Rubinomics. Most people just call it neoliberalism. Elizabeth Warren, probably to her credit, tangled with Barack Obama and his neoliberal economic team, her advocating for consumer protection, individuals who were going bankrupt and who were being very harshly treated by the banks and the credit card companies. Another area where his record is mixed is in race relations. As I said, some people, when he was being elected, had this hope, this naive hope, that with a black president, that would solve the racial issue in America. Now, we know that the issue is more complicated than that. But even keeping that in mind, you might be surprised to hear that race relations didn't even really improve during the Obama presidency. He bears some responsibility for that, although there are certainly others who acted in a downright destructive fashion. One warning sign that racial issues would not be smooth sailing came early in Barack Obama's first term. It was a small incident that blew up and dominated the news for several weeks. Harvard professor William Gates was returning from a trip overseas when he found he couldn't get into his house. The lock was jammed. When he and his taxi driver managed to force the door open, a neighbor across the street called the cops on them. When the police arrived, it degenerated into a spat. Professor Gates was mad at being asked for his ID in his own home, and he gave a hard time to the white policeman, Sergeant Crowley, accusing him of racism. They argued, and Gates was arrested for disorderly conduct. This caused an uproar. Many people saw this as yet another example of the police unfairly harassing a black man. Other people said, no, it's unfair in the other way. The cop wasn't doing anything wrong, and it was Professor Gates who should have cooperated. A couple of days later, President Obama waded in, and that's when things really blew up. He said, I don't know, not having been there and not seeing all the facts, what role race played in that. But I think it's fair to say, number one, any of us would be pretty angry. Number two, that the Cambridge police acted stupidly in arresting someone when there was already proof they were in their own home. And number three, what I think we know, separate and apart from this instance, is that there is a long history in this country of African Americans and Latinos being stopped by law enforcement disproportionately. Obama's comments fueled the controversy, with police associations taking offense at being called stupid, and Obama had to back down a little bit. He invited both Professor Gates and Sergeant Crowley to the White House for a so-called beer summit. By then, the damage was done. A poll from Pew Research showed public disapproval of Obama's remarks by a 41 to 29% margin, and more importantly, support for Obama from white voters dropped from 53 to 46%, and his white support would never receive the majority of white support again through the rest of his 2 terms in office until maybe right at the very end. Now you might be saying, what's this all about? It seems like a minor trivial incident that got blown out of proportion, and you would be right. But if you look at it a different way, almost as a sort of political psychology, you can see how all of the pieces fit together and why various people on both sides of the debate reacted so strongly. You have, of course, the police arresting a black man in situations that might be unfair, and that obviously brings back the whole history of tense relationships between blacks and the police in the United States, which, as we've seen in this class, are often the flashpoint for conflict. The other thing, remember those 60s radicals who took refuge in the university? Well, Professor Gates, of course, is a Harvard professor, and Barack Obama was also a constitutional law professor at the University of Chicago. President Obama actually knew Professor Gates, and for a lot of people, it seemed that here's this liberal president taking the side of a liberal professor against an ordinary Joe. Here is this cop who's just trying to do his job and who is catching a lot of crap for it. So in that way as well, it kind of brought back the whole culture war, those 60s liberals and those 60s radicals who seemed to have control of the universities, to be very influential also in the media, and to often kind of condescend and look down at ordinary blue-collar workers, white working class people who were often sort of mocked as ignorant, and in this case were called stupid. Obama could read the polls as much as anybody could, and maybe it's not a coincidence that a couple of months later, probably sensitive to the idea that he was losing white support and seeming to take the side of black people in an unfair way, Barack Obama decided to insult Kanye West. Kanye West had caused controversy, as he often does. This time he interrupted a speech at the Video Awards, taking the microphone away from Taylor Swift. I'm going to let you finish. You might remember that. And Barack Obama called Kanye West a jackass. In fact, President Obama would double down on those remarks a few years later. I can't help but wonder if this is what pushed Kanye West to support Donald Trump and his Make America Great Again agenda. Maybe this was Barack Obama's Achilles heel, the sense that he was distant from ordinary people, that he was a bit condescending, more comfortable with other university professors and the financial elite on Wall Street, and that he looked down at regular Americans as if they were stupid jackasses. Whether that assessment is fair or not, you can see how it fuels today's populist politics. And the crisis in race relations was not limited to trivial spats that were blown out of proportion. There were serious events fueling it as well. In 2012, George Zimmerman shot dead Trayvon Martin, an unarmed teenager who Zimmerman thought was prowling around his neighborhood. When in the following year Zimmerman was acquitted, anger erupted, and you started seeing the hashtag Black Lives Matter circulating on Twitter. Already in this event, you can see the polarization of American popular opinion on the racial issue. Some supporters of Zimmerman responded by digging up evidence that they said Trayvon was no angel, associating him with guns and marijuana. The overwhelming majority of Americans saw that as unfair. The acquittal of Zimmerman after shooting an unarmed teenager. Further fueling the Black Lives Matter movement was the death of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. Brown was shot dead by a white policeman responding to reports of shoplifting at a local store. The slogan, "Hands up, don't shoot," emerged amongst protesters, citing the account that Michael Brown had his hands up and was obeying the police when he was shot. We shouldn't be surprised by now to hear a counter-narrative emerged by opponents who cited, and in this case they may have been right, that Michael Brown was actively resisting arrest and may have been reaching for the policeman's gun when he was shot. This is quite typical in the polarized political climate of the United States, where the two sides of the debate can't even agree on the facts. Another case that fueled the Black Lives Matter movement was the case of Eric Garner in New York City, who was arrested for a minor infraction. He was selling loose cigarettes. Police put him into a chokehold and he died of a heart attack. With these deaths of unarmed black people at the hands of the police seemingly happening over and over again, the Black Lives Matter movement got serious momentum and media attention. But despite the wall-to-wall coverage of these issues in the media, popular opinion actually swung against Black Lives Matter. Already in 2011, before Black Lives Matter really got started, Donald Trump was already exploiting racial tensions. He got behind the conspiracy theory that Obama wasn't actually born in the United States, and he was thus ineligible to be president and illegitimate. And he kept it going all the way through 2016, saying Obama's birth certificate was fake, that he was actually born in Kenya, and hinting that he was secretly a Muslim. Many people saw this as shameful pandering to white racists who simply could not accept the reality of a black president. But despite being roundly ridiculed for his part in the birther conspiracy, Trump may well have known what he was doing, cynically taking advantage of racial tensions to build himself a political base ahead of the 2016 elections. So now you see the political landscape within which Trump was elected president. Part of it is simply racial tensions, including white racism. Part of it is a feeling that the country is run by self-interested elites who don't care about ordinary people. Sometimes this has more of a cultural cast, as in criticism of university professors and liberal media elites who look down on ordinary people. And sometimes it has more of an economic cast. Are politicians are in the service of Wall Street and big business, who are making big profits while ordinary working people are losing their jobs by the millions. Add these three things together: white resentments against minorities and immigrants, cultural rebellion against liberal elites, and economic rebellion against corporate elites, and you have the ingredients for the right-wing populist movement of Donald Trump.